The safe deposit box was smaller than I expected, for something that held everything. It was a Tuesday morning, in March, 8:47 a.m., and I was sitting in a private room at Heartland Community Bank in Millhaven, Kansas. The room smelled like carpet cleaner and old paper. There was one fluorescent light overhead, a small table, 2 chairs, the kind of room where people come to verify that someone they loved is actually gone. The bank manager had placed the metal box in front of me, without ceremony, the way bank managers do, and then quietly closed the door behind her. My grandmother, Dorothy Jean Calloway, 81 years old. 47 years on the same 280 acres of Kansas farmland had passed 11 weeks earlier. I had been at her bedside when she went. She had held my hand and asked me to make sure the tomatoes got planted before the last frost. Not the farm, not the deed, the tomatoes. I sat with the box for a moment before opening it. Inside, a manila envelope labeled Tax, Records, a rolled land survey from 1977, a photograph of my grandfather, standing in front of a John Deere tractor, squinting into the sun, and underneath all of it, a small black USB drive with a strip of masking tape on it, written in my grandmother's handwriting. For Mara, open alone. I looked at those 3 words for a long time. My grandmother had lived through the Depression. She did not own a computer. She had never, in the 35 years I had known her, plugged anything into a USB port. She had asked my cousin's teenage son to help her with her cell phone every single Christmas, which meant she had asked someone to put this together for her. She had planned it. She had decided what needed to be recorded, and she had made sure I was the only one who could get to it. Dorothy Jean Calloway did not own a computer. She had never sent an email. She called me on a landline every Sunday at 7 p.m. Central, and wrote her grocery lists on the back of church bulletins. The only screen she voluntarily touched was the TV remote, and she still referred to the cable guide as the channel book, whatever was on this drive. She had learned how to do something she had no use for. For me, she had spent some portion of her last months on Earth asking someone to teach her a thing she would never need again, because she decided I would need it. My grandmother had spent 81 years making sure things were tended properly. Apparently, she extended that to USB drives. I picked up the drive. It weighed almost nothing. I also noticed, in the corner of the box, a pair of wire-rimmed reading glasses, the ones she wore every evening to read her seed catalogs. Tortoiseshell frames, one arm slightly bent, from where she had sat on them 3 winters ago and refused to get new ones. I placed them carefully on the table beside me. Then I put the USB in my bag, closed the box, and told the bank manager I was finished. I did not open the drive in the parking lot. I did not open it at the gas station where I stopped to fill up. I drove the 45 minutes back to my apartment, made a pot of coffee, and sat down at my work laptop, the one with the encrypted partition and the write blocker software I use for forensic analysis. I opened a new folder. I named it Calloway Estate. Then I plugged in the drive. My name is Mara. I am 35 years old. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment in Wichita with a used sectional sofa, a very old cat named Sargent, and approximately $400 worth of houseplants that I am slowly failing to keep alive. I was a cyber warfare specialist with the United States Army, 12 years, 2 overseas assignments, 1 counterintelligence rotation at Fort Meade that I am not permitted to discuss in detail. My job, in the plainest terms possible, was to find things people thought they had hidden: files, accounts, communications, patterns in data that looked like noise, until you knew what question to ask. I was medically retired 14 months ago, after a vehicle accident during a training exercise left me with 2 herniated discs, and a nerve condition in my left leg that makes standing for long periods feel like someone is pressing a lit match against my calf. On good days, I walk without a cane. On bad days, I use one and do not apologize for it. I now work as a freelance cybersecurity consultant. I review infrastructure. I audit access logs. I testify, occasionally. In civil litigation cases as an expert witness in digital forensics, I am not a dramatic person. I do not raise my voice. I did not raise my voice during 12 years of active duty, and I did not raise it after I came home. What I do instead, what the Army trained me to do and what I have done instinctively since I was 8 years old, is watch, catalog, count. My grandmother understood that about me in a way no one else in my family ever did. She was the one who taught me to read a land survey when I was 12, laying the old paper flat on her kitchen table, and tracing the property lines with her finger while she wore those wire-rimmed glasses and told me, "Mara, land does not lie. People lie, but land does not." When I read the contents of that USB drive, I heard her voice in every single file. I did not cry. I started a new folder. My grandmother's farm had been in the Calloway family for 63 years. My grandfather bought the 280 acres in 1961 for $14,000. Money he had saved working at a grain elevator for 11 years. He died in 1998, and the land passed entirely to my grandmother in his will, with a clear written provision that the farm should go to the grandchildren, specifically to me and my cousin Ellie. Upon Dorothy's death. My mother, Karen, is Dorothy's only surviving child. I need you to understand something about my mother before I continue. She is not a cruel woman in the obvious sense. She does not yell. She does not slam doors. She expresses her intentions the way water expresses itself against stone. Slowly, persistently, through channels you do not notice until the surface has changed. She has lived in Millhaven her entire life. She married my father at 22, divorced him at 41, and has since devoted considerable energy to the management of a life she considers significantly beneath what she deserves. She resents, quietly and consistently, the fact that her mother left the farm to the grandchildren instead of to her. She mentioned this precisely once, directly, in 2019, at my grandmother's kitchen table, after one glass of wine. "It is just strange," she said, "that mother thinks it is more appropriate for the land to skip a generation. I have been here every week for 40 years. My grandmother looked up from her seed catalog and said, "You have been here every week. That is true." She did not say anything else. She turned the page. That was the beginning of what I would later understand was a pattern with 3 distinct waves. Wave 1 came in the spring before my grandmother's death. My mother called me while I was still on active duty and mentioned, casually, that she and Uncle Ray, her brother, the executor named in my grandfather's original will, had been looking into some tax strategies for the farm. There was a way, she said, to set up a family LLC that would reduce the estate tax burden when the time came. It would be better for everyone, more efficient. She had talked to a man named Gerald Booth, a notary public in the county, who had some experience with agricultural estate planning. I told her I would look into it when I got home. I did not tell her that I found the framing odd. A notary public does not typically design estate tax strategies. Wave 2 came 8 months later, when I was at Walter Reed doing rehabilitation. My grandmother had been hospitalized for the first time. Congestive heart failure. Brief. She came home after 4 days. My mother called to update me and mentioned in the same breath as the medical update that she and Ray had started the paperwork on the LLC. Because they did not want to wait and find the estate in a complicated position, she said my grandmother had agreed in principle. I asked if there was anything in writing. My mother said she thought I should focus on recovering. Wave 3, the one that crossed every line, happened on a Thursday in November. My grandmother was in the last weeks of her life, in and out of clarity, sleeping more than she was awake. According to county records I would later obtain, a deed transfer was executed on November 14th. The 280-acre Calloway property was conveyed from Dorothy Jean Calloway to Hargrove Family Holdings, LLC, a company registered in Kansas 8 weeks earlier, with my mother and Uncle Ray as sole members. The deed bore my grandmother's signature. It was notarized by Gerald Booth. My grandmother died on November 25th. 11 days later, 280 acres, 63 years in the Calloway name, one forged signature, 11 days before death, 1 notary seal, $312,500 in assessed land value, 1 LLC registered 8 weeks before the transfer. 0 disclosure to me or my cousin Ellie. I did not know any of this when I sat at that bank table in March. I knew only that my grandmother had left me a USB drive and told me to open it alone. Before I tell you what was on that drive, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been the one who was away? Not by choice, but by duty, and come home to find that away was used as a reason to make decisions about things that were yours? Have you ever been told, directly or indirectly, that the fact that you were serving, or recovering, or simply not in the room, meant you forfeited your right to know? Tell me in the comments. Because I think more people have lived some version of this than we ever talk about. And if you believe that being absent for the right reasons should never cost you what you were promised, subscribe to this channel. That is what we talk about here. At 11:22 p.m. on a Tuesday, I was alone at my kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee, my forensic laptop, and the contents of my grandmother's USB drive open in front of me. Sergeant the cat was asleep on the windowsill. The apartment was quiet except for the sound of traffic on the street below. The drive contained 7 files. The first 3 were scanned documents. My grandmother's original land survey from 1977, a letter from my grandfather's attorney confirming the estate structure, and a handwritten note in my grandmother's own handwriting, dated October 31st of last year, addressed to me. It read, "Mara, I asked Reverend Paul's wife to help me make this. I do not fully understand it, but she says it will keep safe. Check the date on the deed they file, then check where I was that afternoon. I love you, Graham." I read that note twice. Then I set it aside and opened the remaining 4 files. File 4. A video, 43 minutes long. My grandmother, sitting at her own kitchen table. In front of a camera someone had propped against a coffee can. She was wearing those wire-rimmed glasses. She was reading aloud, slowly, deliberately, a full description of the property, its history, her wishes, and her explicit statement that she had not authorized any transfer, any LLC, or any change to the estate structure she and my grandfather had established. The video was timestamped October 31st, 7 weeks before she died. She read every word in a voice I had not heard from her since I was 12. Steady, unhurried. The voice she used when she was telling me something she needed me to carry. At the end of the 43 minutes, she folded her hands on the table and looked directly into the camera lens. "The way you look at someone when you already know where they will be sitting when they watch this," she said. "The land does not know who owns it on paper. It only knows who tends it." Then she reached forward and turned off the camera herself. I sat with that sentence for a long time before I opened the next file. File 5, an audio recording. 12 minutes and 9 seconds. 2 voices. My mother and a man I did not initially recognize. They were discussing the deed. The man said, "The date needs to be before the hospitalization if we want this to hold up." My mother said, "Will it?" He said, "It will hold up fine. Nobody checks notary logs in this county." I saved that file to 3 separate encrypted locations before I listened to the rest of it. File 6. A photograph. My grandmother at a bank counter. Heartland Community Bank. On November 14th at 2:14 p.m. She was updating the authorized access list for her safe deposit box, adding my name. I recognized her coat. I recognized her posture. The way she always stood slightly to one side because her hip had been replaced in 2018. The bank's digital timestamp was printed at the bottom of the image. File 7. A printed copy of the forged deed. Which someone? I later determined it was Reverend Paul's wife, the same woman who had helped with the USB, had obtained from the county recorder's office. The deed was dated November 14th. Execution time listed 2:30 p.m. At 2:14 p.m., my grandmother was at the bank in Millhaven adding my name to her safe deposit box. At 2:30 p.m., according to the forged deed. She was 16 miles away at Gerald Booth's office signing a property transfer, counting. Not anger, not grief, counting. I opened a new subfolder. I labeled it Timeline. I began a log entry with the first discrepancy, 16 miles. 16 minutes, age 81, one replaced hip. Impossible. Over the following 8 months, I built the case the way I had been trained to build everything. Methodically. In parallel with ordinary life. I went to my consulting work. I watered my failing plants. I drove to Millhaven twice a month to check on the farmhouse, which sat empty and locked while the deed dispute wound through preliminary legal channels. I told no one in my family what I had found. Not my mother, not Uncle Ray, not my cousin Ellie, who I loved and who deserved to know, but whose text messages I knew my mother read over her shoulder at Sunday dinners. I made one call, to a woman named Adrian, a former JAG attorney I had known since Fort Bragg, who now ran a small civil litigation practice in Topeka. I drove to her office on a Saturday morning in April, signed a retainer agreement, and slid a printed copy of the timeline across her desk. She read the first page. Then she read it again. She did not speak for 4 minutes, which was not like Adrian. When she finally set the papers down, she did not look at me with the professional caution of an attorney assessing exposure. She looked at me the way you look at someone when you have just understood something that was already true before you walked in. "Mara," she said, "this was not opportunistic. Someone sat down and planned this while your grandmother was still alive." She said it once. She did not say it again. I nodded. I had known that since the bank security photo. I had simply needed to hear it said out loud by someone who had passed the bar. "The audio recording?" she said. "Is it clean?" "Studio clean," I said. I ran it through spectral analysis. No artifacts, no edits, no compression anomalies. She looked at me over her own reading glasses, not wire-rimmed, but the expression was familiar. "Who is the man on the recording?" "Gerald Booth," I said. "Notary public, licensed in 3 counties." I cross-referenced his voice against 2 public appearances he made at a county commissioner meeting in 2021. "Waveform match is 94.3%. Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How long have you had this?" 6 weeks. "And you have told no one?" "No." She set the papers down and looked at me directly. "Mara, this is not just deed fraud. If he falsified the notarization, and that audio is what you say it is, that is a federal wire fraud issue the moment that deed was filed through the county's electronic recording system. That crosses the line into FBI jurisdiction. I had already calculated that. I had simply wanted a second opinion from someone who had passed the bar. I contacted a forensic document examiner named Dr. Harriet Voss, who worked out of the University of Kansas Forensics Department and had testified in 400 cases across 22 years. I sent her a certified copy of the deed and my grandmother's authenticated signature samples from 3 other documents. Her updated will from 2018, a bank signature card from 2020, and a Christmas card from last year that I had kept because she had written my full name in it. Dr. Voss's report came back 41 days later, 11 pages. The conclusion. On page 1. Ink pressure analysis. Letter formation patterns and baseline angle indicate with high probability that the signature on the November 14th deed was not produced by the same individual as the comparison signatures. Estimated probability of common authorship, 4.2%. I printed the report. I added it to the binder I had been building since April. The binder was now 3 inches thick and contained 247 pages. I also discovered, during a background search on Gerald Booth, that the county recorder's office had fielded complaints about 2 previous deed transfers he had notarized, both involving elderly landowners, both transfers to family LLCs, both contested after the original owners died. Neither complaint had led to a formal investigation. I forwarded that information to Adrian with a single note. Pattern: 3 incidents. Total estimated land value across all 3. $891,000. Adrian filed the FBI tip the following Monday. $312,500. My grandmother's land. 280 acres. 63 years in one family's name. 1. Fraudulent deed. 1. Corrupt notary. 3 victims identified. $891,000 in total fraudulent transfers. 247 pages of documentation. August months of work. 0 confrontations. I had built this file for 8 months. It had one purpose. The invitation arrived in early July. Cream cardstock. Script font. You are cordially invited to celebrate the grand opening of Hargrove Family Farms. A new chapter for a beloved Millhaven landmark. Saturday, July 19th. 2 p.m., light refreshments. Tour of the property. Community welcome. My mother had sent it to 47 people. She had rented a tent. She had ordered catered sandwiches and a cake with a tractor on it. She had sent a press release to the Millhaven Gazette. I called Adrian. The 19th, I said. I know, she said. The FBI's timeline was already moving in that direction. I will make a call. On the morning of July 19th, I put on a navy blazer and a clean pair of slacks. I picked up the 3-inch binder from my kitchen table. I drove 45 minutes to the farm where my grandmother had lived for 47 years. The tent was white. There were folding chairs and a banner that read Hargrove Family Farms in green letters. Roughly 30 neighbors had come. My cousin Ellie was there, standing near the food table with a plate of something she was not eating. She looked at me when I arrived, and her expression did something complicated that I did not have time to address. My mother was at the front. Near a small podium someone had borrowed from the Methodist church. Uncle Ray stood beside her, holding a pair of ribbon-cutting scissors. I took a seat in the second-to-last row. My mother gave her speech. She talked about legacy. She talked about family. She talked about the courage it takes to step up and steward something important when life creates a transition. She thanked Uncle Ray. She mentioned, briefly, that the farm had been restructured for the next generation. She used the word legacy 4 times in 3 minutes. She used the words steward and future and responsibility. She did not mention winter wheat, which was what my grandmother had planted on the South 40 for 31 consecutive years. She did not mention the soil pH records my grandmother kept in a green ledger going back to 1989, or the specific heirloom tomato variety. Brandywine. Always Brandywine. That my grandmother had started from the same seed stock since 1994. My mother spoke about this land for 4 minutes, without saying a single specific thing about it. I had the Southfield's full rotation schedule memorized by age 14. She did not mention my grandmother by name until the 3rd paragraph. She did not mention me at all. Uncle Ray cut the ribbon. People applauded. Then my mother gestured to the microphone and said they had a few more remarks to share. I stood up. I walked to the front of the tent. My cane tapped once on the wooden platform edge as I stepped up. My mother's expression went through several phases in the 2 seconds it took me to cross the space between us. Confusion. Irritation. The beginning of a social smile. "Mara," she said. "We were not expecting you to." I set the binder on the podium. The tent was quiet in the way that outdoor spaces get quiet when something shifts. And everyone can feel it, but no one knows yet what it is. I opened the binder to the first tab section and turned it to face the crowd. "Page 1, I said. "The original deed of record. Dorothy Jean Calloway. Sole owner. 280 acres. Millhaven, Kansas. Dated 1961. I turned to the second tab. Page 14. The deed filed November 21st of last year, transferring this property to Hargrove Family Holdings LLC, signed, according to the document, by Dorothy Jean Calloway, notarized by Gerald Booth. I turned to the third tab. Page 31. Security footage from Heartland Community Bank, November 14th, 2:14 p.m. My grandmother, updating her safe deposit box access records. Adding my name. I paused. 16 miles. 16 minutes. 1. Replaced hip. The tent was very quiet. I turned to the fourth tab without looking at my mother. Page 88. Dr. Harriet Voss, Forensic Document Examiner. University of Kansas. 41 years of experience. Her finding: a 4.2% probability that the signature on the transfer deed was produced by Dorothy Jean Calloway. Uncle Ray said something. I do not know what. It registered as sound, not language. Page 147. I said. A transcript of an audio recording in which Gerald Booth and another party discussed the necessity of backdating the deed's execution date. The FBI has the original recording. They have had it for 11 weeks. The silence after that sentence lasted 4 seconds. I counted. All I could hear was wind pulling at the tent canvas, the creak of a folding chair, someone's coffee cup set down on a table. My mother sat down, not into a chair. There was no chair behind her. She simply stepped back and found the edge of the platform and sat down on it, very carefully, the way you sit when your legs have stopped working reliably. I closed the binder. At the end of the gravel driveway, 2 black sedans that had been parked since before the guests arrived opened their doors. The agents were polite. They were professional. They did not raise their voices. They addressed my mother and Uncle Ray by their full legal names, which I had provided in writing 8 weeks earlier. They explained that Gerald Booth had already been taken into custody that morning at his office. The Millhaven Gazette reporter, who had come to cover the farm opening, was still in his chair in the 3rd row with his notebook out. He wrote a very different story than the one he had come for. My cousin Ellie found me by the fence line afterward, while the agents were still talking to my mother. She stood next to me without saying anything for a long time. Then she said, "How long did you know?" 8 months, I said. She looked at the farmhouse. Graham knew. Didn't she? She knew enough to prepare. Ellie was quiet again. Then, I am sorry I did not. Don't, I said. You did not know what you did not know. We stood there together until the sedans left. The legal process took 14 months. Gerald Booth pleaded guilty to federal wire fraud and 2 counts of notary fraud. Federal charges had been filed September 8th. His arraignment was September 22nd. His license was revoked. He was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution to all 3 families he had defrauded, a total of $891,000. The Kansas Secretary of State announced a formal audit of all deeds he had notarized in the preceding 7 years. Uncle Ray entered a plea agreement on October 14th. He received 2 years of supervised probation, a $45,000 fine, and was removed as executor of any estate in the state of Kansas for a period of 15 years. His name was removed from Hargrove Family Holdings, LLC, which was subsequently dissolved by court order. My mother went to trial. Trial began the following February. She sat across the courtroom from me for 4 days. Her attorney argued that she had been misled by Gerald Booth, that she had believed the paperwork was legitimate, that she had acted in good faith on the advice of a professional she trusted. The prosecutor played 12 minutes and 9 seconds of audio. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. My mother was convicted of 1 count of conspiracy to commit estate fraud and 1 count of wire fraud. She was sentenced to 18 months of home confinement, 5 years of probation, and ordered to pay full restitution of $312,500, the assessed value of the farm, plus legal costs. The deed transfer was voided. Title to the 280-acre property was restored to the estate of Dorothy Jean Calloway, and from there, per the original estate documents, divided equally between me and my cousin Ellie. On the first Saturday in October, a full 23 months after my grandmother had passed, I drove to the farm alone. I let myself in through the back door with the key she had given me when I was 17. The kitchen smelled like old wood and the faint memory of coffee. Her reading glasses were on the windowsill above the sink, where she had left them. Wire-rimmed, tortoiseshell, one arm slightly bent. I picked them up and held them for a moment. Then I set them back exactly where they were. I went out to the south field, where the kitchen garden had been. I planted tomatoes. That afternoon, I called Adrian to close out the billing. She asked how I was doing. I told her the tomatoes were in. Good, she said. That is good. I am not my family's most convenient soldier anymore. I am not the one they call when something needs to be managed from a distance. I am not the person who can be safely ignored because she is deployed, or recovering, or simply not in the room. I am just a woman who owns her grandmother's land. I want to talk to you for a few minutes, not about my story, but about yours. Because I suspect some of you watching this right now have a version of what I experienced. Maybe it does not involve a farm. Maybe it does not involve the military. But I think you know what it feels like to be the one who was away. And to come back and find that away was treated as permission. Maybe you were away at a job, a hospital, a difficult marriage, a stretch of years when you were simply surviving something hard, and you were not watching closely because you were busy not drowning. And while you were focused on staying afloat, someone in your family made decisions about things that were yours. Property, money, an inheritance, an account. Something that was meant for you. Restructured quietly. Explained away later with language that made it sound like they were being helpful, and when you asked questions, you were told you were being ungrateful, or suspicious, or that you did not understand how these things work. I want to say something clearly. You understood exactly how it works. You were just being told that your understanding did not count. Here is what I know about families and money. After everything, the people who exploit financial access do not think of themselves as criminals. They think of themselves as practical. They look at a situation, land, a retirement account, a trust, a shared asset, and they tell themselves a story about why they deserve it more than you do. You were never around. You do not know what it takes to manage something like this. You always had it easier. You left. You chose your life over the family. The story changes, but the conclusion is always the same. Your absence is your forfeiture. They are almost never right, and they almost always believe, completely, that they are. What makes this kind of fraud possible is not malice. Exactly. What makes it possible is the assumption that you will not look, that you will accept the story you are given, that the distance between you and the asset, physical, emotional, legal, is enough to protect them from accountability. The most powerful thing my grandmother did was not leave me money. It was leave me evidence. She knew, somehow, that what I would need wasn't rescue. I was never going to need rescue. What I needed was the truth in a form no one could argue with. She prepared that for me with the same methodical care she applied to everything. The garden, the seed catalogs, the land surveys. She had spent 81 years understanding that careful documentation was the most durable form of protection. She was right. Here is what I want to say to anyone who is currently in the middle of something like this, who suspects something is wrong but does not have the evidence yet, who can feel the ground shifting but cannot yet name what is happening. Document everything you have access to, today, right now, before you finish watching this. If there is a property involved, look it up in your county recorder's office. In most states, deed records are public. You can search them online. Look at the ownership history. Look at the date of any recent transfer. Look at who signed. If there is a bank account or investment account involved, request a full statement history. If you are a named beneficiary on anything, call the institution directly and confirm your status. Do not rely on what a family member tells you. If there is a will or trust, you are entitled to a copy if you are named in it. An estate attorney can tell you your rights in your state for the cost of one consultation. Many offer free initial calls, and if you find something wrong, write it down before you say a word to anyone involved. Get it on paper. Get a timestamp on it. The moment you confront someone who is in the middle of committing fraud, the evidence starts disappearing. The accounts get moved, the documents get altered, the story gets refined. Your silence, in the early stages, is not weakness. Your silence is the thing that keeps them from knowing what you are building. Do not mistake quiet for surrender. There is a particular kind of family dynamic that I want to name, because I think it is more common than anyone admits. It goes like this. One person in the family is designated, formally or informally, as the responsible one, the capable one, the one who handles things. And because that person is capable, they are also the one who is most easily taken for granted. Their competence becomes invisible. Their contribution becomes assumed. And over time, the family comes to believe that this person does not actually need anything because they have always managed. That person is often the one sitting here watching this. You have been managing. You have been the one who showed up, who handled the hard things, who did not ask for acknowledgement because you were too busy doing the work. And somewhere along the way, the people around you confused your self-sufficiency with not having needs. They confused your silence with consent. You are allowed to need things. You are allowed to want the things that were promised to you. You are allowed to ask questions about money and property and inheritance without being treated like you are being greedy or difficult or disloyal. These are not violations of family love. They are basic financial self-protection, and you are entitled to them. I also want to say this. Cutting off contact with someone who has defrauded you is not a failure of compassion. It is a recognition that trust, once deliberately destroyed, cannot be rebuilt on demand. My mother stood in a courtroom and cried. I do not doubt that her pain was real, but her pain did not change the facts recorded in 247 pages of documentation. And I was not willing to pretend otherwise in order to make the holiday dinners more comfortable. You do not owe anyone a performance of forgiveness you do not actually feel. What you owe is honesty, to yourself. First, my grandmother spent 47 years on 280 acres of Kansas land. She watered it and worked it and read seed catalogs by lamplight with her wire-rimmed glasses, and never once thought the land needed to prove its worth to anyone. It was simply hers, and she tended it. And when the time came, she made sure it would pass to someone who understood what it meant. That is what I think about when I am out in the Southfield. Not the trial, not the depositions, not the 14 months of legal machinery grinding its way to a verdict. I think about the fact that she knew me well enough to know I would find the truth if she left it where I could reach it. I think about what it means to be that known by someone. This land holds that now, and I intend to tend it the same way she did. If this story meant something to you, if you recognized something in it, or if you know someone who needs to hear it, I hope you will share it. Not for us, but for whoever in your life might be sitting quietly with a suspicion they have not known how to act on yet. They deserve to know. The truth, documented carefully, is always enough. Silent justice. The title of this story is The Deed. When I first named this file on my laptop, I meant it literally. The document. The forged transfer. The piece of paper that tried to erase 63 years of family history. But a deed is also an act. A thing done. What my grandmother did. Alone. At 81. In the last weeks of her life. Asking a preacher's wife to help her set up a USB drive she did not fully understand. That was the deed that mattered. A deliberate, documented act of love. Prepared without any certainty that it would be needed, and left exactly where I could find it. That is the deed this story is about.